Hallway Conversations, the space where creators, founders, and builders can look for all the foundational concepts, supports, and inspiration to grow their ideas into products and business. Discovering ideas is definitely a very interesting phase to be in because we wake up, we literally walk around and go to sleep thinking about the best ideas that we can build for. But what happens with all those ideas? Like, is there a way for us to figure out which ones work so that we can just focus on those and try and test all our way through? Definitely, it's a hard journey, and I totally get it. And that's exactly why today's conversation is all about discovering, analyzing, and validating the right ideas to work on. And I'm super happy to have somebody with me here today who I really look up to in the product space. Joining me is Ravi Mehta, the co-founder and CEO of Scaled Higher, a platform that's reinventing the way people learn and grow with the power of coaching. He was formerly the chief product officer at Tinder and also led product teams at Meta, Xbox, and TripAdvisor. Hi, Ravi. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, how are you? Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited for the conversation.
Awesome. I'm great, and I hope you're great as well. So, yes, let's just dive into the conversation. So,
Sounds great.
let's go. Yeah, let's go around with the basics. We know founders really have so many ideas in their kitty, and we're just in different stages of thinking about these ideas. But how do you go about navigating and picking the right ones to start with the journey?
It's a great question. So I left Tinder in early 2020. And throughout my career, I've been at larger companies. I've been at smaller companies. So companies as big as Meta and Microsoft. And as early stage as just a couple of people. And I've really enjoyed going back and forth between the two. I love the scale of a larger company, but I love the impact of a smaller company. I knew for my next step, I wanted to focus on building a startup, but I didn't know what I wanted to solve, what problem I was really, wanted to spend the next few years working on. And so I put together a framework that really helped me hone in on the right idea. And I think for myself personally, I tend to get really excited about customers and customer problems, and immediately and intuitively go to where I think there's an opportunity to provide value for customers. But I tend not to be as diligent about thinking about, okay, what does the business model look like? And so I put together a framework that really helped me, think about things from both lens, both the customer value standpoint and the business value standpoint. And that framework consisted of a few different factors. And these are very practical. I think for any entrepreneur, the framework that you decide on will somewhat depend on how you tend to think and what are the things that you naturally gravitate to versus what are the things where you need a checklist to sort of make sure that you're focusing on the right things before you commit to a business idea. So the first thing I focused on was fundability. So how likely are VCs to fund this idea early and without traction? So assuming that I wanted to raise money before I had gotten significant signs of traction, what are the ideas that I think would be fundable? So in other words, how much does this idea tie into trends that VCs are currently getting behind? And at the time, those were trends around blockchain and crypto and Web3 and metaverse, also trends around AI. There's also particular business models that VCs tend to really like. They like the continuity that comes with a monthly recurring revenue model. And so SaaS ideas are often very fundable. The second thing I looked at was time to revenue. So how quickly in months can we go from zero in revenue to actually generating revenue? Given that revenue is one of the key signs of traction, the time to revenue is a measure of how long is the riskiest part of your startup's life? How long do you need to pitch based on the vision versus the traction? The third factor was revenue opportunity size. So this, of course, is important. So how big is the ultimate opportunity of the market? And the goal being is to find markets where there's clearly $1 billion plus market that would be attractive to VCs, where you can really clearly demonstrate the size and the viability of that market. Also really important, especially in today's ecosystem, is what does the ease of customer acquisition look like? What channels make sense? What is the cost of those channels? How quickly do those channels scale? A great business idea that's generating a lot of value for customers won't be viable if you can't acquire those customers profitably. And with the changing mix of the ad landscape and changing channels, that can be a challenge. The next factor was technical challenge. So how technically difficult is the product to build? That's an important factor in sort of understanding how easy or difficult a particular idea will be to execute. And then finally, and importantly, was changes to technology and habits. So what are the prevailing trends in the technology or in market behavior that the idea taps into? How strong are these trends? And so how much of a tailwind is there for this particular business? So those were really the factors that I thought about as part of considering different ideas and where I really wanted to invest my time and energy. And that coupled with a really customer-oriented view.
It's awesome. What I really like about this framework is that it sort of covers every area of the whole cycle, which is starting with the whole fundability factor to getting onto the market and really, putting that thought in terms of where does it go with the audience that I want to reach. And like you said, putting the customer problems at heart is something that every founder, every builder would like to do. And this framework is sort of very neat because it covers at least, the 90-95% of focus that you want to have on the market just before you start diving deeper in. So I think it's pretty extensive to think about each of this. And the more I see is like, it's a lot of self-reflection as well with this journey, right? So as you start putting your notes onto each of these points, it's going to be like, how are you really passionate about this idea? Like what really drives you into each section of this? And that's really good. So thank you so much for sharing your framework with me and with us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for entrepreneurs, the self-reflection is really important. You might want to bootstrap a company, in which case your framework might look differently. You might have experience with particular channels that you want to take advantage of, like a sales channel or ad channel, which you feel really confident about. So you might want to think about that differently. So absolutely agree that self-reflection piece is really important.
For sure. Yeah. And, now that we are talking about this framework and the various parts that it would help us think about, there's also sometimes that you're really passionate about an idea that has a very early on market or, has a very smaller size TAM, let's say, and then you have very less ways of showing your assumptions to be proved and validated. So in those cases, have you found certain signals or ways that would help a creator or a builder try to get more traction in the space that you're building for?
This is a really good question. And I think it highlights both the biggest opportunity and the biggest risk with early stage startups. And so startups don't have a lot of data to work with. And so a lot of people, especially at larger companies, get used to making data-oriented decisions, which is important. And so a key way to understand what customers want is to run experiments and get to statistical significance and use the validations from those experiments to increase your understanding of customers. But that requires lots of data points. And when you're a startup, you just don't have those data points, but you do have a really clear line to customers, and you can have lots of customer conversations. And startups often have an advantage because they have no choice but to talk to customers. At a larger company, you could go months or even years without talking to customers if you're just running experiments and make decisions that way. That's not optimal, but that does often happen. Whereas at a startup, you really have no choice other than to connect with customers. So I like to think about this in terms of, at a large company, when you have a lot of data, a lot of your decision-making is based on statistical significance. But at an earlier stage, we can think about another concept, which is informed conviction. So if you have a lot of data points, you can ask yourself, do we have statistical significance, and make decisions based on that? In the earlier stage, you can ask yourself, do I have informed conviction? And can I make a decision based on that? And so that implies two things. One is that you have conviction, that you believe enough in a particular direction that you're willing to put energy behind it. And two, that conviction is informed by conversations that you're having with customers, and that you synthesize those conversations into a particular viewpoint. And so I think really good product teams and really good early stage entrepreneurs try to get that informed conviction by triangulating across three different ways of making decisions. The first one is their own intuition. So being an entrepreneur means that you need to rely on product sense. You need to have a really good intuition of what the market wants. That's not a bad thing. And those intuitive leaps are often the things that generate really disruptive ideas. But that intuition needs to be informed by two, conversations with customers, and so qualitative inputs. And then three, even though you're early, even though you don't have a lot of users, there's still ways to get quantitative underpinning to your findings, whether it's market research or data from app surveys or from other survey companies. And so if you can take a quantitative understanding of the market, your qualitative conversations, and your strong intuition, and put those together, you can synthesize that into informed conviction for a particular direction. And if you're feeling like you don't have that conviction, then that's a good signal that you need one or more of those three inputs in order to get to the next stage where you feel like you can make a decision and move confidently forward.
Yeah, that sounds pretty practical as well, because the combination goes in well. You take the benchmarks and you go on with. I really liked how you mentioned conversations, because that's something that really gets in more more support for you during those initial days of building. Is when you get through these conversations and you feel like, okay, I'm on the right track. I feel like I'm really making a difference with the customers. So yeah, I think that combination is really good, and it's so practical in that sense that when you don't have enough data to support, and like you mentioned with especially for operators turned builders, they have that immediate transformation from being in large companies, having to run a lot of A/B tests, experiments, and getting used to looking at quantitative models, and like to immediately jump onto this state where they're like, they suddenly feel like they're out of data, and then that's when they figure out, okay, how do I navigate this? So this sounds perfect in that moment. And since you mentioned about these conversations, I'm a little curious to ask you. Was there like a moment for you when you were trying to validate the idea of Scale Higher and trying to get this platform up and running? Did these sort of early conversations really help you in that sense? Do you have any interesting anecdote that happened from that time?
One of the things that I had going for me as we thought about scale as an idea was two things. One, I was spending a lot more time sharing my ideas, building a newsletter, sharing on social media, writing content. And because of that, I had people reaching out to me, just have conversations to get advice or guidance. One of the things that I did, which is very tactical, is when people subscribe to my newsletter, I asked them two questions. What's the biggest challenge you had in the last week? And what's the biggest win that you had in the last week? And so just that has generated, hundreds of conversations with folks where I get to see what are the things that people are working on? What are they proud of? What's challenging them? So that was one way that I could have a lot of these conversations and get a feel for what was important to people from a career standpoint and from a success standpoint. I was also an executive in residence at Reforge, where I helped to launch programs on product strategy and helped to create and launch a program, product leadership. And in those experiences, I was also talking to a lot of people that were at the middle of their career. And what I consistently heard from folks was that they feel like there's more ways than ever to learn and to gain new ideas and skills and frameworks. But what they were really missing was the one-on-one support that they felt like they needed in order to understand how to put all those ideas into practice in their daily work and be more successful as a result. And part of that was exacerbated by the pandemic. Because of remote work and hybrid work, people don't have as many opportunities to talk to their managers. They might not have relationships that are as close. They may have started a new job during remote work and so not met a lot of their colleagues in person. There's less opportunity to have cooler conversations with your peers. So all of that was leading to a climate where people just didn't feel as connected, didn't feel as supportive, but where there's a lot of opportunity and people want to be successful. And so that was the thing that initially gave us some really clear signal that there was an interesting and large problem space here that needed to be solved. And to my earlier conversation about the framework that I was using, there's an overall trend towards personal wellness, of which I think professional success is a factor. People are more willing than ever to engage in services. There's been a lot of innovation around different types of services related to personal wellness, like personal training and nutrition counseling. So we've got like Noom and Peloton and Future and Talkspace and BetterHelp, all as examples of both increased demand for these types of services and innovation around how to deliver
Yeah.
people this that they need. So the two things really came together. Lots of conversations about the problem that people were experiencing, and lots of interesting developments and trends around the solutions that were gaining traction with the market.
Yeah, I mean, what's really interesting here is how a lot of dots got connected for you, starting with the way you usually you are as a person in terms of connecting with people, trying to help them, and also trying to give them what you've learned in the product space. So, since you started with the newsletter, I have to get there because I've been one of those folks who probably discovered you through your newsletter, and it's definitely, like you said, it's great because it is one channel of having to talk with folks who really have a lot of questions and who really are willing to share what they go through on their daily lives. And yeah, over to the Reforge as well. That again was a great channel because a fellow Reforge person as well here. So yeah, I can totally relate to finding a lot of folks, trying to have conversations with them, and basically discussing your your ideas or what stage you're in terms of even product problems that you're navigating through. So I'm glad that you mentioned about not just the channels, but how or what steps you did to navigate through these channels and try to like channelize these conversations together. So that is really interesting. And one more thing that I was really liking about when you connected to the framework part is how you went with the external factors part. Because like you said, personal wellness is something that is coming up in the recent times, and I guess that's going to be the case with each person's idea, the problem space that they're passionate about. And probably the pandemic sort of made it a better time for a lot of these spaces. And like it's important more so now than ever to relate with what's happening around. Because earlier it used to be like, oh, if you're really passionate about it, just go for it. But I think right now it's a lot more practical things that you have to go through with respect to, yes, you are passionate about it, but also just have a certain call with the external factors. Also try to understand what channels that you have to focus on. So it's not just you, but it's a lot of points around you to connect you with to build your idea. So I think your example brought out that very well. So thanks for sharing that, Ravi.
Definitely, I agree with all of that. I think you're spending some time thinking not just about what you're passionate about, but how you can generate value from that, how that might grow over time. Is really important because you're committing when you start a company to spend years on a particular idea. And it's helpful to think out from the moment that you're in right now to a year, 2, 3 years down the road, and understand what the growth model might look like, understand what the business model is, understand what the limits to scaling are. That will all get you, help give you more conviction, and give you, a ability to see around the corner. So that when you do encounter those inevitable challenges, you will have already had some thinking, and maybe set up some processes or some structure to help get you to that next level of growth.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. And now that we're talking about a lot of these conversations and channelizing what you really hear from the market, I would now like to ask you another leading question, which is, what's an actual form of listening? Because it's easy to say, yeah, just listen to your market, go by what it says, and just go on with these conversations. But how do you channelize these signals, and how do you bucket them and focus on what really you need, while you sort of leave the rest away? So how do you direct your focus on that specific channelization of signals?
In terms of the signals that you're getting from the customers?
Yep. In terms of the customers and the market that you're currently building for.
Yeah. One of the frameworks I really like is the jobs to be done framework. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of times when companies are thinking about building for customers, they tend to over focus on their own needs. Like, what's the business model that's going to work here? What's, how do we grow this in an efficient way? But even more important is who is the customer at a very deep level, and what are they trying to accomplish, and how might they be accomplishing that day? And so I think the jobs to be done framework helps to orient yourself not around product-based thinking, but around the idea that a person doesn't use a product, they actually hire a product to complete a job that they have to be done. And when you think in that way, it gets much easier to imagine the competitive set of things that a person might, go to in order to get that job to be done. The classic sort of example of that is, people don't want a quarter-inch drill bit; they want a quarter-inch hole. But you can take that even further and say, people don't want a quarter-inch hole; they actually want to be able to hang a picture frame. And why do they want to be able to hang a picture frame? Well, they want to be able to remind it of their family so that when they're away from their family, they have something to remind them of why they're working so hard. And so very quickly we went from like a very mechanical, tactical thing, which is a quarter-inch drill bit, to solving for a deep psychological need that a customer has. And so I highly recommend there's two books about jobs to be done. They're sort of competing takes on the framework, both of which I think are valuable. One is When Coffee Competes with Kale, which does a good job of talking through the framework, and the other one is The Mom's Test is really good too. And then there's Competing Against Luck, which was the other book that I was thinking of. The Mom's Test is great for having conversations with customers and getting to those jobs to be done. And then When Coffee Competes with Kale and Competing Against Luck are both really good overviews of the jobs to be done framework. And so for us, the thing that was really helpful about that was to understand that, we, are, to a large extent, a coaching company. We want to democratize access to coaching. But if you really talk to customers, it's not like they wake up in the morning and say, I need a coach. Instead, they say, I need personalized guidance, support, and accountability to be more successful. And there's more than one way to deliver that to people. It doesn't need to be through traditional coaching. And so we've done a lot of thinking about what is that job to be done and how can we create a product experience that doesn't rely entirely on one-to-one coaching conversations in order to deliver that guidance and that accountability. So I think that's a really important thing to think about for entrepreneurs, is to get at those deep psychological needs, the jobs that customers have to be done, and solve them at a more fundamental level, rather than thinking first about the product and then about how people are going to use it.
Yeah. Certainly, I completely agree with you there, because it's going to the root of the problem, the why behind what you're building for. And like you said, you can go around to the root problem by just asking why at every step, and then you go from what you really feel like it's just about features and roadmaps and strategy to the actual problem, and which could be like as psychological and emotional as possible, which you didn't know at the roadmap stage, where you just thought it was a feature. So yeah, completely with you on that. And yeah, thanks for the analogy as well, because I think it was perfect on to really understand that, yeah, it lies back in the root of what really you're solving for. So yeah, that brings me to one of the major questions that I think is more relatable to a lot of builders today. Is there's a lot of talk around market categories, and especially with fundraising around, there's always around which category are you building for, and what kind of target segments do you have. So even labels like no code or SaaS, EdTech, Web3, crypto, all of these are just booming. So when somebody, like let's say a new-ish founder, is trying to build their idea in a very, very early phase, how deep should they go with the objective that they have and the market that they're building for? And would you recommend that being the case?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, to some extent, categories are important. They're really important when you go and you're fundraising. Instantly, VCs want to understand, like, what categories do you fit in? Are you a Web3 company? Are you no code? Are you a SaaS company? Are you ed tech? And so, they're seeing so many different business ideas that it's really helpful for them to do that first cut of categorization to understand where you fall, which partner to talk to, even what else they have in their portfolio that might be similar, and what their theses are and how it maps to what you're doing. So it's a really good shorthand. At the same time, I think it can be a distraction, because ultimately your customer doesn't care about your category. They care about, what is the job that they're trying to do? What is the value that they're trying to create in their lives? And while I think, for example, there's lots of really interesting things happening with blockchain and all of the technologies and trends associated with Web3, I think one of the downsides of the mode that we're in right now is people are investing in Web3 companies, and so they're really thinking a lot more about the technology and the product space and a lot less about, well, what are the solutions? And so one of the common, I think, failure modes for, especially for product folks that go into entrepreneurship, is to have a solution that's looking for a problem. And by definition, like categorizing what you're doing into a particular category like Web3 is a solution first, a market-oriented approach or market category-oriented approach rather than a really customer-driven approach. So I think good entrepreneurs have to be able to do both, talk about what categories they're playing in, what the trends are, how they're tapping into those trends, what are the untapped problems within those categories, but also be able to map back to the very deep sort of fundamental things that users are trying to accomplish for themselves and solve for those things, even if they do that in a cross-category way. And one, I think, great example of this is looking at the success of companies that use product-led growth strategies like Slack. And for many years, there was this idea that B2B products are really separate from B2C products. And as a result, you take very different approaches to building for them. And I think companies like Slack recognize that employees are people too. They want to use well-designed products. They want to use products that are delightful and fun. And if you can get a individual person or a team of people to be really excited about a product, then that will create a pull within the organization. And so, I think that is a really good example of how to think in a way that's agnostic of category rather than constrained by the category.
Yeah, makes sense. Have it more like a navigating guide, but just don't go deeper into it and sort of fixate into it so you feel like you're really missing out on what really is your signal call that's coming from outside. So yeah, absolutely. So yeah, over to one of the last questions that I have for you. And it is again going to talk in terms of the things that people don't often enough talk about, when it comes to extracting the best from the ideas. We always think about, oh, what's the idea that worked for A, or what's the idea that worked for B, or what was the last best idea that I worked on? But it's never going to be what idea did I drop midway, and why did I really do it, and can I take something from it, or what was the idea that I really didn't find success with?
Yeah, I think so. Throughout my career, I've worked in very different domains. There's been a consistent focus on working on things that are consumer oriented. So I've worked in online gaming, I've worked in dating and social and in travel, but all with the sort of orientation towards solving for an individual person's needs and doing that really well. And as a result, I've been able to tap experiences across domains and figure out what are some interesting ideas in one domain that can benefit another domain. One interesting example was at TripAdvisor, where we were working on search. We were trying to make the search on TripAdvisor more powerful, knowing that a lot of people would essentially search the TripAdvisor experience through Google. So they type in the name of a hotel or a place that they might want to visit. That would come up in the SEO results. TripAdvisor is often one of the first links that shows up, and then people would tap into the TripAdvisor experience and go from there. And that was often a better way to find things on TripAdvisor than using using TripAdvisor's own internal search. And so we spent a lot of time as a team trying to think about how do we improve the search and discovery experience on TripAdvisor. And we looked at what other companies in the travel space like Booking and Expedia and others were doing. But what we found was that the model for how they were solving search wasn't necessarily the model for how we needed to solve search. They had less review data. They had a less diverse set of different places. Most of the search on Booking and Expedia was hotels oriented. And instead, what we found was that there are really good examples for search in completely different domains. And so we looked at, how does search work on Amazon or Etsy or even Spotify, where there's a huge inventory of potential answers to a question, and where, the right answer to a person's question is both based on the explicit thing that they've asked for in their search, as well as past behavior and preferences. And so we drew a lot of inspiration from those other domains in order to figure out what were some ways to improve the TripAdvisor search. And that was an interesting example of, an iterative process where initially some of the things, didn't work that we tried, but over time we were able to get into a search and discovery and personalization model that worked better, both being inspired by what we were finding through our experiments, what other folks in the travel industry were doing, but also looking beyond the travel industry for inspiration on how to enable really great intent-driven search, really good browse experiences, and really good discovery experiences.
Yeah, no, that's a great example because it, like you said, it lets you look at something outside of your immediate circle and something that you would rather take inspiration from, just because it doesn't work the same way as in your industry, but something as parallel as you can draw inspiration from. So that's a great example. Thank you so much for sharing, Ravi. And I think it was such a brilliant episode because I learned a lot. And also there were a lot of discussions around how to navigate and basically where we started with, how to discover ideas and how to basically build a conviction around what you want to build. So I think the frameworks that you suggested and also the examples that you shared were really practical and a lot more in terms of having tried and tested it out because it's coming from your experiences of building products. So I'm so glad that the folks who listen to this would be able to take a lot of takeaways from this and can go ahead and use this to navigate and get their ideas going. So thank you so much for doing this and sharing your thoughts, Ravi.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Awesome.